Senator Mike Lee of Utah, a constitutional scholar and three-term Republican senator, discusses various issues facing the United States government and his experiences in the Senate. Lee emphasizes the importance of adhering to the Constitution and its principles of limited government, separation of powers, and federalism. He expresses concern about the expansion of federal power since the 1930s, particularly through broad interpretations of the Commerce Clause and the delegation of legislative authority to executive agencies. Lee explains that the Constitution was designed to limit government power and protect individual liberty. He argues that the accumulation of power in Washington, D.C., and within unelected bureaucracies has undermined the original constitutional structure. Lee advocates for a return to a more limited federal government focused on protecting life, liberty, and property, rather than trying to solve all of society's problems. The senator provides insight into the inner workings of the Senate, particularly the power dynamics between leadership and rank-and-file members. He describes what he calls the firm, the leadership of both parties in the House and Senate, who often negotiate major legislation behind closed doors. Lee criticizes the practice of presenting massive spending bills with little time for review or amendment, forcing members to vote on legislation they haven't read. Lee recounts a specific instance in 2018 when a 2,232-page omnibus spending bill was released late at night and passed within hours, giving members no real opportunity to review its contents. He describes calling President Trump to urge a veto, but the president had already signed the bill based on staff recommendations. Lee argues this process subverts proper legislative procedure and accountability. The senator expresses frustration with Senate Republican leadership, particularly Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, for consolidating power and not allowing sufficient debate or amendments on major legislation. He suggests McConnell and other long-serving leaders have become disconnected from the conservative base and too willing to compromise with Democrats on spending and other issues. Lee is deeply concerned about the national debt, which has reached $35 trillion. He criticizes both parties for continually increasing spending without a plan to balance the budget. The senator argues that many in Congress have lost sight of the proper role of government and view it as a solution to all problems rather than a limited protector of rights. He explains how the military-industrial complex serves as a gateway drug for Republicans to support massive spending bills, with defense allocations used to entice GOP votes for overall increases in government expenditures. Lee suggests this has contributed to fiscal irresponsibility while not necessarily improving military readiness or strategic positioning. The conversation touches on U.S. foreign policy, with Lee expressing skepticism about prolonged military interventions and proxy wars. He cites involvement in Yemen as an example of mission creep that has dragged on across multiple administrations without proper congressional authorization. Lee argues the executive branch has expanded its war-making powers beyond constitutional limits. The senator partnered with Bernie Sanders on legislation attempting to curtail U.S. involvement in Yemen, demonstrating his willingness to work across the aisle on issues of executive overreach. Lee contends that many foreign entanglements primarily benefit the defense industry rather than enhancing American security. He also raises concerns about recent actions undermining the U.S. dollar's status as the global reserve currency, suggesting moves like cutting Russia off from the SWIFT system may have unintended negative consequences for American economic power. As a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Mormon, Lee has been a strong advocate for religious liberty. He recounts instances of Democratic colleagues expressing reservations about judicial nominees based on their religious beliefs, particularly Catholicism. He argues such religious tests for public office are unconstitutional and un-American. The senator criticizes what he sees as increasing hostility toward Christianity in some quarters, while noting the Senate itself still maintains a culture of religious respect among members. He suggests progressives who claim to champion democracy are often the most anti-democratic when it comes to respecting religious pluralism. Lee discusses the political dynamics in his home state of Utah, which is traditionally very conservative but has seen some shifts in recent years. He expresses concern that despite Utah's conservative population, the state lacks a robust conservative media ecosystem. He argues the two major newspapers and broadcast outlets in the state lean left of the general populace. The senator suggests this media environment, combined with left-leaning universities, has contributed to some Utah Republicans governing in a less conservative manner than their constituents might expect. He notes the influx of Californians to Utah has had mixed effects, with many new arrivals actually being quite conservative and fleeing progressive policies. Lee is highly critical of the Biden administration, describing it as one of the most progressive and lawless in U.S. history. He expresses concern about President Biden's cognitive abilities, recounting secondhand stories of the president appearing confused or disoriented in meetings. The senator discusses the potential for Vice President Kamala Harris to become the Democratic nominee, warning Republicans not to underestimate her campaigning abilities despite her gaffes. He argues the media is already working to rehabilitate Harris's image and erase her record as a progressive senator. Looking ahead to the 2024 election, Lee emphasizes its critical importance given the state of the country and the Senate leadership transition. He hopes Republicans will retake the Senate majority and select a new leader who will empower individual senators rather than centralizing power. Throughout the conversation, Lee advocates for various reforms to restore constitutional governance. He promotes the REINS Act, which would require congressional approval for major executive branch regulations. Lee argues this would reassert legislative authority and democratic accountability over the regulatory state. The senator also expresses opposition to court-packing proposals, warning that expanding the Supreme Court would further politicize the judiciary and potentially set off an escalating cycle of court manipulation. He defends the current nine-justice structure as an important institutional norm. Lee criticizes voter initiatives and other direct democracy measures as potentially undermining the Republican form of government established by the Constitution. He argues representative democracy through legislatures is preferable to ballot measures that can be manipulated by special interests. The conversation touches on the role of media in shaping political narratives and public understanding of government. Lee laments the lack of substantive reporting on important issues like congressional procedure and constitutional limits. He suggests the mainstream media often acts as co-conspirators with political leadership in obscuring how decisions are really made in Washington. The senator argues Americans have been marinating in progressive ideology through education and media for generations, making it difficult to articulate classical liberal ideas about limited government. He recommends Cleon Skousen's book, The Naked Communist, as an explanation of how Marxist ideas have influenced American institutions. Senator Mike Lee offers a wide-ranging critique of the current state of American governance, arguing that a departure from constitutional principles has led to unsustainable debt, foreign policy overreach, and a breakdown in democratic accountability. He advocates for reforms to reassert legislative authority, limit executive power, and return to a more federalist system with most decisions made at the state and local level. While acknowledging the significant challenges facing the country, Lee expresses hope that the 2024 election could be an inflection point for returning to constitutional governance if voters and political leaders recommit to foundational principles of limited government and individual liberty.